Piers Morgan has been saying the same things about Meghan Markle for 5 straight years. He got fired for saying them. He got shouted down, complained about, formally investigated, and professionally buried for saying them. 40,000 people filed complaints. Meghan herself filed a personal complaint. His employer asked him to apologize and he refused, walked off set, and never came back. And right now, in the space of a single extraordinary week, virtually everything he said is being confirmed in public, one after another, in the most spectacular fashion possible. Love him or hate him, and plenty of people feel strongly in both directions. You cannot ignore what is happening. So today we are walking through 10 things Piers Morgan called correctly about Meghan Markle, starting from the least explosive and working all the way up to the one that actually cost him his career. Stay all the way to the end, because number 1 is the one that started everything, and it lands differently once you have seen the full picture. Let's go. Number 10. She speaks in contradictions. Here is the simplest test you can apply to almost anything Meghan Markle says publicly. Take 2 statements she has made in close succession and place them next to each other. Then ask whether both can be true at the same time. Not whether they sound convincing individually. Whether they hold together when you look at them side by side. A few weeks ago, she did a soft, intimate interview. Rocking chairs, no makeup, close friend across from her. The whole setup designed to signal authenticity and emotional honesty. She told the world she was living the happiest, most fulfilled chapter of her life. Her marriage was thriving. Her children were wonderful. California was everything she had hoped for. She was genuinely at peace in a way she had never experienced before. Write down the date because it matters. Then, weeks later, she shared a quote with her millions of followers about surviving the hardest 7 years of your life. She shared it twice in one day. If you count backwards from the date she posted it, 7 years lands you directly on her wedding year. The year she married Harry, the year she joined the most famous family on the planet, the year the entire Sussex project began. Piers caught it within hours. And his point was not complicated. You cannot be simultaneously living your best life and barely surviving the hardest years you have ever had. One of those things is the performance. The other might be too, for that matter, but they cannot both be true at the same time. And the question he is always asked is which version is real, and whether either of them is. What makes this pattern significant is not any single instance of it. It is how consistently it repeats. Happy and fulfilled, then barely surviving. Independent and thriving, then victimized and alone. Ready to move forward, then relitigating events from 5 years ago. The statements are always delivered with conviction. They always connect with the segment of the audience that needs to hear them in that moment. And they are always quietly, completely incompatible with what came just before. Piers called this out first. He was mocked for it. And now the contradictions are landing fast enough that the audience is doing the counting themselves. Number 9. The title she gave up but never let go of. Meghan Markle has not been a working royal since January 2020. She and Harry made that choice deliberately, publicly, and with considerable ceremony. They surrendered the duties, the patronages, the institutional roles, all of it, in exchange for the freedom to live and work independently. That was the stated deal. That was how it was presented to the world. And yet the royal identity has never quite followed the announcement. The Royal Association is still the engine of everything she sells. The candles reference the children's titles. The brand aesthetic echoes the imagery of aristocratic English life. The people in her inner circle use language about her that only makes sense if you are still treating her as royalty. Calling her a queen, talking about her reigning again. She shares that content. She elevates those voices. She amplifies the framing. What Piers has always pointed out is that this cannot go both ways indefinitely. You either left or you did not. If you left, the commercial operation you built afterwards cannot keep running on the fuel of the identity you walked away from. If you want to maintain that identity commercially, then the exit was never really an exit. It was a relocation, a rebranding, a way of keeping the asset while shedding the obligation. The public has gradually come to see this tension clearly. The exit narrative is the product, the royal connection is the engine. And trying to maintain both simultaneously, year after year, is the contradiction that audiences on both sides of the Atlantic have grown tired of watching her navigate. Number 8. The brand that does not work. The commercial record of the Sussex lifestyle operation is, at this point, very difficult to defend. And Piers has been making this point since before most people were willing to say it out loud. The jam labels peeled off jars on arrival, some candles shipped without wicks. The clothing resale platform generated single-digit sales figures that would be considered poor for a small independent seller, let alone for someone with the kind of platform and name recognition Meghan commands. The Mother's Day collection launch, which should have been a triumphant brand moment, became a viral disaster when the most famous person doing the unboxing struggled visibly with the product, could not pronounce the item names, and admitted mid-video that she did not even like what was inside the box. The video ended with what sounded generously like polite encouragement. It spread everywhere within the hour. The deeper problem Piers identifies is not any single failed product. It is what the collective failures reveal about the fundamental structure of the operation. This is a brand built entirely on the association with a famous name rather than on genuine product expertise, authentic lifestyle authority, or any specific skill set that the person behind the brand has demonstrated over time. When the association is the only real thing you are selling, the product itself barely matters, until it does, and then the gap between the premium pricing and the actual quality becomes a story that writes itself. You cannot charge luxury prices while delivering a product experience that generates concern from the person who agreed to publicly endorse it. A $100 million Netflix deal, a $20 million Spotify contract, the most recognizable name on the planet for a solid 3-year window after the Oprah interview. And the commercial infrastructure that has been built from all of that is not performing at anything close to the level those numbers would suggest it should be. That is the picture Piers has been painting for years, and the actual sales figures are now making his case considerably more effectively than he could himself. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture that other channels skip, go ahead and hit the like button. It genuinely helps us reach more people. Number 7. The problem with playing statesman without a mandate. Harry's trip to Ukraine was not an official visit. He had no authority from the British government, no mandate from the palace, no standing as a representative of anything other than himself. He was a private citizen who had voluntarily stepped back from every official role that might have given his words institutional weight. And yet, he gave a speech on the international stage, calling for specific policy positions on an active conflict, a speech that directly contradicted what the American administration had publicly stated about that conflict. The White House was asked about it and responded that Harry was not speaking for the United Kingdom. The point Piers makes here is clean and hard to argue with. You cannot freelance on the back of an identity you walked away from. The credibility that made anyone listen to that speech came from Harry's royal background, the titles, the military service, the family association. He used every bit of that borrowed authority while simultaneously insisting he had left all of it behind. You do not get to have it both ways. And the fact that his speech dropped 4 days before King Charles was due to address the United States Congress, the single most significant diplomatic moment of Charles's reign, made the timing not just awkward, but actively damaging to the institution Harry claims to have no connection to anymore. Number 6. The signal that came from the biggest stage. When King Charles addressed the United States Congress, watched by hundreds of millions of people across the world, he spoke about the historical connections between the British royal family and America. He named cities. He named ancestors. He drew a line between his family's history and the country he was addressing. Harry's name was not in the speech. On the largest stage of his reign, in front of the most powerful audience in the world, the king spoke about his family's connection to America without mentioning his second son. Piers flagged it immediately and said what it was: a deliberate, public, calculated signal, not an editing oversight, a statement about who belongs in the story and who has been written out of it. When you place that alongside what Charles did to Prince Andrew, the full removal of titles, patronages, official connections, and the use of his home, a pattern becomes visible. Andrew's situation was serious, but Andrew never publicly dismantled the institution. He never wrote a memoir attacking the family from the inside. He never spent years systematically using the platform the institution gave him to damage the institution itself. Harry has done all of those things, and the people closest to Charles are now openly asking whether what happened to Andrew will eventually happen to Harry, not as speculation, as a question about timing. Number 5. The trail of people she left behind. There is a pattern in Meghan's history that Piers has returned to many times. And it is one of the most consistently revealing things about her, if you are willing to follow it honestly rather than treating each departure as an isolated incident. Look at the people who have been close to her over the years. Not press-adjacent or professionally useful in a transient way, but genuinely close. People she described warmly in interviews, people who were trusted with private access. And then look at what happened to those relationships over time. Her father's side of the family, entirely cut off. A father who walked her down the aisle in a photograph that circulated globally, and who has not had meaningful contact with her since. Friends she described in published interviews as lifelong. Gone. Former advisors who worked closely with her during the palace years. Multiple members of staff who departed Kensington Palace in circumstances serious enough that a senior, named official put his concerns in writing. Specific language. Professional tone. Documenting a pattern of behavior that he described as causing serious harm to people working in that environment. 2 individuals specifically identified as having been driven out of their roles and their confidence systematically undermined. That email exists. The name attached to it is real. The language is not vague or impressionistic. It is the careful, measured language of someone documenting what they witnessed for the record. And Kensington Palace, an institution that manages far larger crises than workplace disputes without saying a single public word, decided that the evidence it received was credible enough to announce a formal investigation, not to manage it quietly, to announce it publicly. That decision does not get made lightly inside that institution. Piers's argument is consistent and hard to dismiss. A trail of severed relationships, combined with documented written evidence from a named official, combined with a formal institutional inquiry, is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. And a pattern that predates the royal family, continued through it, and has not changed since, is telling you something that individual explanations cannot account for. Number 4. The immigration question that will not go away. This one is not generating the loudest headlines right now, but Piers has consistently identified it as the most serious long-term legal exposure in the entire Sussex situation, and nothing that has happened recently has changed that assessment. In his published memoir, Harry openly described using multiple illegal substances. Those admissions are in print, under his name, for anyone to read. They are not rumors or allegations. They are his own words. And on a United States visa application, concealing prior drug use is a federal offense that carries deportation as a consequence, not as a theoretical possibility, as a regularly applied legal outcome. A conservative legal organization has been pursuing Harry's immigration records through the federal court system. A judge ordered the records released. They arrived heavily redacted, more than half the pages blacked out. Nobody has explained what is in those pages or why so much of them needed to be hidden. The current administration has made its feelings about the Sussex household reasonably clear through various public statements and decisions. The Heritage Foundation's attorney has stated plainly in open court what the legal consequence of lying on an immigration form is. And Piers has said, without any particular drama, that this case is far from finished. He is not wrong. Number 3. The financial reality behind the image. The Sussex public image is one of effortless, sun-drenched California affluence. The lifestyle brand, the charitable foundation, the international tours, the carefully styled appearances at carefully selected events. All of it projects wealth, security, and the kind of freedom that only comes from genuine financial independence. The message, implicit in every photograph and every product launch, is that these are people who have built something real and sustainable from scratch. The financial picture that is starting to emerge from people close to the situation looks considerably different from that image. The big streaming deals are done. The speaking fees, according to people who track these figures professionally, are not at the numbers that were being quoted publicly a few years ago. The original claims about what Meghan was earning per appearance appear to have been significantly inflated relative to what the market is currently paying. The lifestyle brand is not generating revenue at anything close to the level required to maintain the Montecito lifestyle. And the inheritance money that provided the financial foundation for the early California years is, by multiple accounts, being spent at a rate that is not being matched by incoming revenue. There is a detail that keeps coming up among people who live in and around Montecito, one of the wealthiest postcodes in the United States, a community where certain standards apply that are understood implicitly by everyone who lives there. When you purchase a property of significant value in that community, you update it, you renovate it, you spend what is required to bring it up to the standard the neighborhood expects. That is not optional. That is simply what is done at that level. The Sussex property has not been renovated. It sits in its current condition, last properly updated by a previous owner many years ago. In Montecito, that is a legible financial signal to the people around them. It is not being interpreted as understated taste. It is being interpreted as a constraint. Piers has always said the money would be the final truth. When the lifestyle becomes more expensive than the income supports, the image has to change. That moment is closer than the public currently understands, and the timeline is narrowing faster than the official narrative acknowledges. Before we continue, subscribe to Palace Insider and drop a comment below because the conversation in the comments has been seriously good lately. Number 2. The investigation that was never resolved. In 2021, Kensington Palace announced that it was conducting a formal investigation into bullying allegations made against Meghan by multiple members of staff. This announcement came days before the Oprah interview aired. Meghan's team immediately characterized it as a coordinated hit, a calculated attempt to damage her reputation just before the most important interview of her life. That framing got significant traction, and the substance of the allegations got considerably less. But strip away the timing argument and look at what actually happened. Kensington Palace, an institution that has managed genuine constitutional crises, major royal scandals, and decades of tabloid pressure without ever publicly acknowledging internal staff disputes, made a public statement about a workplace investigation. That is not something that institution does without reason. It does not do it as a political maneuver. It does it when the evidence threshold has been crossed and staying silent would itself create a liability. A senior official named provided documented written evidence about what he had witnessed. His language was measured and professional and specific. He described a pattern of behavior, not a single incident. He named people who had been affected. He used language that, in any other workplace context, would be treated as serious enough to warrant immediate formal action. The findings of that investigation were classified as confidential and never published, which means the public never found out what the investigation actually found. What we know is that the palace thought it needed to happen, that a named official provided written evidence to support it, and that the results were judged too sensitive to release. Piers has returned to this point consistently because the announcement itself is the evidence. You do not publicly announce a formal investigation into a member of a royal household unless you have credible reason to. That credibility came from somewhere. And the fact that the findings remain confidential does not mean the investigation found nothing. It means whatever it found was considered too significant to put into the public domain. Number 1. The truth that cost him his career. Here we are. In March 2021, Piers Morgan watched the Oprah interview alongside most of the rest of the world. And the morning after it aired, he said something that 40,000 people formally complained about. Something that Meghan herself filed a personal grievance over. Something that his employer asked him to retract on air. And something he refused to walk back even at the immediate and very public cost of one of the most prominent jobs in British television. He said he did not believe her, not that he disagreed with specific details, not that he thought certain claims required further context or independent verification. He said flatly, without hedging, that he did not believe what Meghan Markle was saying, and that he would not believe her if she read him a weather report. Then, he walked off the set rather than retract it, and he never came back. He paid for that position in the most immediate and professional way available. And then he held it for 5 straight years while most of the media landscape called him bitter, obsessive, and wrong. Now look at what has accumulated in the time since that morning. The Happy Life versus the Hardest 7 Years posted 3 weeks apart to the same audience. The princess identity she claims to have surrendered but commercially maintains through product descriptions and inner circle language. The brand that keeps failing in ways that make the premium pricing look disconnected from reality. The staff inquiry that the palace felt compelled to announce publicly rather than manage privately. The immigration records that arrived heavily redacted from a court-ordered release. The financial picture that the Montecito community can read clearly even when the public cannot. The list of Hollywood power brokers who have quietly stopped returning calls. What Piers identified in 2021 was not a specific lie that could be fact-checked and disproved. What he identified was a consistency problem. The sense that the version of events being presented kept shifting to serve whatever the current moment required, that the contradictions were accumulating faster than any single narrative could absorb them, and that an audience paying close enough attention would eventually notice. That observation cost him his career. It also turned out to be correct. He was not right about every detail. He has been wrong about specific things along the way, as anyone covering this story in real time will inevitably be. But the core observation, that this woman's public statements do not hold together when you examine them with the same basic journalistic skepticism you would apply to anyone else, has been confirmed repeatedly and publicly over 5 years. Piers paid an enormous professional price for saying it first. He did not wait for the consensus. He did not hedge until the polling shifted in his favor. He stated his position, defended it under extraordinary pressure from every direction simultaneously, and walked away from a career most people would have protected at almost any cost, rather than surrender his right to say what he believed was true. That is either the most stubborn, self-destructive thing a journalist has ever done, or one of the clearest examples in recent memory of someone refusing to be pushed off a position they genuinely held. You can decide which, but you cannot argue with where 5 years of accumulated evidence has landed. Not everything in this story is finished. The visa situation is live. The title question inside the palace remains unresolved. The financial runway is narrowing but has not run out. There is still time for things to shift. But what cannot be undone is the credibility. Once an audience stops believing you, really stops, not as a tabloid game, but as a repeated, documented, gut-level conclusion, you do not get that back with a new podcast or a lifestyle rebrand or a rocking chair interview with a supportive friend. Piers was right. He said so. He paid for saying so. And now the rest of the world is catching up. One broken chocolate, one wickless candle, and one contradictory Instagram post at a time. 10 truths, 5 years in the making, all of them arriving in the most public and irreversible fashion imaginable in the same extraordinary week. So here is the question. Was Piers Morgan always right about Meghan, or do you think he has been too harsh? Drop your honest take in the comments below. I genuinely want to know where you stand on this one, and whether the picture looks any different to you now than it did 5 years ago. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you do not miss what comes next, and a like really does help us reach more people who want the full picture. See you in the next one.